everyone, welcome to another episode of Industry Night with me, Nycci Nellis, the show that takes you on the deep dive of the happenings of the hospitality industry. If you are new here, hi, thanks so much for joining me. And if you're old here, hi, thanks so much for joining me again. A little background on who I am and what I do. I've been covering the hospitality, food, wine, and all of that stuff, the whole industry for the last 20 years. It all started with the list, areyouonit.com, the online e-zine that tells you everything that's happening in the DC metro area, events, holiday happenings. Let's see, by the time this show comes out, we'll be talking Valentine's Day, I'm pretty sure. Every restaurant opening, every restaurant promotion, all the hotels, and lots of great travel advice. It's all in the list, areyouonit.com. Of course, you follow me at NYCCI, NELLIS, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, all the social media platforms. I am on all of them. You tune in every Sunday to Foodie and the Beast. We just celebrated 15 years on air. That's my husband, David, and I. We are the only food and wine variety show happening in the DC metro area. And then lastly, lucky me, I have this fabulous show, Industry Night. It is now a podcast and YouTube, and I've been doing it for the last 7 years. And it really allows me to dig in deep on lots of things. So look at where I am today. I've been so fortunate to have this residency at the Watermark Hotel. And specifically today, we are in Wren restaurant. So as you've heard on previous shows, because I've been here for a couple weeks now, the Watermark is like Oz in the middle of Tyson's. This whole Capital One area has totally blown up. There's all these gorgeous buildings, a beautiful theater, this incredible perch on the 11th floor with all these activations. And then this gorgeous restaurant here. I have Chef Yo sitting next to me, who's going to tell us all about the restaurant and what is happening here. And then later in the show, we're going to sort of dig down deep about 2023 and what has happened locally in the hospitality industry. Lucky me, I have two luminaries who are going to break it down with me. I got Washingtonian's Jessica Sidman and Anna Spiegel, who is now at Axios. She used to be a Washingtonian, so it's kind of going to be like bringing the band back together. And we're going to hit all the things that has happened over the last year and sort of what we can look forward to in 2024. But first, let's talk about where I've been, because you know your girl has been out and about. I did hit the Grove, which is a new restaurant in the Cabin John area. So that's like Potomac in Montgomery County. So I have to be honest, it's been a minute since I've been out there, even though I live in Kensington. They have totally redone that mall. It's an outdoor mall. So it's more like a town center. They really did a beautiful job. It's all white and very pretty. And the Grove is a really interesting space. So it's helmed by Jose Lopez Picasso. He's doing a really lovely Spanish-infused menu. What's interesting about it for that area is that it's incredibly high end. Real intricacies are put into each plate. There's a lot of foam, which I think we could do a little bit away with personally, because I feel like we've done foam. But other than that, the flavors really melt well. The plates are really beautiful. And he's really doing some interesting things, especially for the suburbs. He does have Michelin. He would like to get a Michelin star. Unfortunately, he's in the wrong area if he wants that, because you can't get a Michelin star in Maryland, at least not yet. I also got to check out Victor Alvisu's new Taco Bamba, which just opened up above the Wegmans over in, what's that area called? City Ridge. And it looks amazing. And it's a Taco Bamba, so you know it's going to be delicious. And I am so lucky because where I am situated, I got a Taco Bamba 5 miles one way and a Taco Bamba 5 miles another. So I am like surrounded by Taco Bamba. And if you want to know more about what's going on with Victor Alvisu, because he is doing so many things, check out the show I did with him a couple of weeks ago, because he's really in service of all of his restaurants and the people he works with. And I love where his head's at. So check that all out. Okay. So in case you didn't notice, I got some delicious food in front of me, and Chef Yo from Wren is joining me. Hi, Chef. How are you?
Pretty good. How are you? Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, well, actually, thank you for inviting me to my show here. So tell us a little bit about your background, because you've cooked with and for a lot of chefs around the country.
So I started in the New York Nobu restaurant. That's my first restaurant. Only
Right.
one Nobu in the New York. So I was working under Morimoto. And after I moved to San Francisco to study California cuisine, and after that, my journey started in the French restaurant, Mediterranean restaurant, and back to my roots and start working in the Japanese restaurant.
And what brought you into Tyson?
It's a upcoming town. I worked a lot of big city, so I tried to stay away from a big city, New York, San Francisco, DC, Philadelphia. No, now it's just a kind of upcoming and very friendly neighborhood areas, and they're not far from my where I'm living. So that's why.
You were like, this is good.
That's right.
So let's talk about Wren and what you're doing at Wren, because it's a beautiful space here in the Capital One area in the Watermark Hotel. Tell me a little bit about sort of the kind of food you're serving in the izakaya, because you have lots of options here. We can do an izakaya or an omakase.
Yes.
So what about, like, I know you've got lots of food in front of me, but I assume this is all on the main izakaya menu.
Correct. This is a kind of signature item in our restaurant. So izakaya is just chef choice kind of tasting course, but a family style. So not individual items, not individual plate, just big item, big plate, and they're gonna share like a family style.
Okay.
So just my concept is like coming to my living room, just enjoy, have a good time.
Okay.
That kind of concept. And the omakase is a really high-end sushi omakase. We do once a week, just only Monday, 6 seat. And all fish comes from Tokyo Toyosu Market.
Oh,
Fish market.
really?
It's really, really good. I highly recommend.
Okay, so it's only 6 seats. It's only on Monday night.
Correct.
How many courses?
You're gonna taste between 15 to 20 pieces sushi.
Wow. So you leave very full.
Correct.
Okay, great. And just tell me quickly, like, what is if I was coming in for dinner,
Yes.
what would you be like, okay, Nycci, you have to have this?
You had about Tokyo chicken. That's for sure. This is it took almost 3 months to kind of perfect the dish. That's a gluten free.
Okay.
And then marinate a kind of special sauce. That's the way the cornstarch and the tapioca starch. Everything gluten free to create a crispy fried chicken.
Well, I can't wait to dig into that. Thank you so much, Chef. So tell people where they can find you both online and on Instagram, like if they need to like find out what's going on at Wren.
Wren Tyson's.
Okay, he got a little help. Wren Tyson's. All right. Thank you, Chef. Thanks so much, and thanks for having us in today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, great. 2023 was a hell of a year, right? Like after 2 years of the pandemic, like it felt like at the beginning of the year that like things are like feeling really good again. Like everything was just kind of vibing out there. All these new restaurants were going to open. People were really excited. People were going out. Events were happening again. Like all of it just felt really, really good. Having said that, there was this like simmering like anger, just like kind of boiling like just under the surface. And it was like everywhere. It was like on the industry side, but it was also on the patron side. And I feel like there was an animosity building. It felt like to me, like restaurants were like, you don't understand what we've been going through. And the patrons were like, we don't care. And that's what was happening in restaurants. And then, of course, there were all these other issues. We had confusion over tipping. There are all these service charges. Nobody knows what any of it means. There's crime. There's rude customers. There's rude servers. The sports teams may be leaving. I don't know. It sounds like it's just all gone to pot. So I thought who better to discuss it with, but people who like really do journalism other than me, who just kind of glosses over it. And we could talk about all the many restaurants that opened in 2023 and sadly all the restaurants that closed in 2023, but really how we go into 2024 with our eyes wide open. So in with me today, I got Jessica Sidman, you know her from Washingtonian magazine, and her former partner in crime, but who's now at Axios, is Anna. She's kind of a partner. She's a PIC, Anna Spiegel. So thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
So instead of reading both your bios, which I think is incredibly boring, just give me like a couple sentences so like everybody, if they don't know your byline, so they know who you are and what you are.
Yeah, I mean, pretty simple. I'm a food editor at Washingtonian magazine, and I write about the trends and people and restaurants that make up Washington's food and drink scene.
But I think it's important to say that while you have a critical eye towards food, you also do food journalism. Because I think a lot of people get very confused when you tell them you're a food writer. They just assume that you are then a critic. Only.
Yes, yeah. I always say I try to write about food in the same way that a crime reporter writes about crime or a political reporter writes about politics. I just have a different beat.
Excellent. I love that. Okay.
Yes.
And you, Miss, tell me.
I am a Axios DC reporter, a former Washingtonian food editor of 13 years. And now, I also still cover the restaurant beat, dining and drinking in DC, as well as a host of other themes for Axios.
And how do people get access to Axios? Because it's kind of new in the food beat world,
Absolutely.
right? And I love it. It's great.
Thank you. The best thing to do is sign up. It's for free.
Mm-hmm.
You can sign up on axiosdc.com. We also publish on the web, just like Washingtonian or another site would. So
Sure.
you can look us up at axiosdc.com.
Great. Okay. So let's talk about, you guys did a lot of deep dive reporting this year because there was so much going on. I'd really like to start with the Initiative 82, tipping, service charges. I feel like that's an umbrella, right, that everybody's been grappling with. Let's talk about it kind of from the industry side at first. Most of the industry did not want the initiative. I mean, that was sort of what I was hearing. What was your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the Restaurant Association, Metropolitan Washington, which obviously represents a huge segment of the industry, they lobbied pretty strongly against it. Again, this is the second time an initiative like this has
right,
come
because
about.
Initiative 77 also passed, but they negated it.
And then it was overturned by the DC Council.
Right.
They brought it back, and I think a lot has changed over the last few years. There wasn't really an appetite to overturn the will of the voters yet again, but I think it's a very complicated issue that's not easily explained on a ballot, and it's kind of counterintuitive when you say, oh, we're raising the minimum wage. Like, isn't that a good thing?
Right.
But basically, you're changing the way that people who work in the industry are paid is really what's happening. And a lot of people don't even know necessarily how servers and bartenders paid. There's a tipped wage, which is lower than in DC. The current minimum wage is $16.10, and I forget what it's like a third of that.
Right. It's like
and it's gone up.
I think it's 8.
Yeah, I think it's up to 8 now.
Right, but originally it was like $3 or something like that,
it's,
right?
It's much less, but then your base wage is essentially subsidized by the tips that diners give to the restaurant. And a lot of servers and bartenders do make significantly more than minimum wage.
Right.
We're talking $20, $30, $40 an hour. So there's a lot of them argued, this is fixing a problem that doesn't exist. At the same time, there's certainly a lot of instability in the industry, and this potentially creates a way to even it out a little bit. And obviously, tipping is a very complicated social force. And, there are factors of discrimination and bias that factor into it.
Sure.
So,
but I think I've always had the issue for me as people who, cover the food scene.
Yeah.
I'm always tipping.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine that somebody'd be like, well, I'm tipping 10% because the service wasn't so good. I never even understood that.
And I also think one thing to always keep in mind is that legally restaurants or any business is bound to make up the gap. So if your server's making, $6 an hour at the tip minimum wage, they don't make the $16 an hour at the full minimum wage. The business has to make up the difference.
So they're making it no matter what.
Making it no matter what. I mean, I think that One Fair Wage will argue, while there are a lot of businesses that are shady and don't actually do that, if you're a server and you're saying you're not making your minimum wage, then you go to labor board.
Right.
But
I never understood the initiative. I mean, it is complicated. I agree.
Yeah.
You did surmise it though very well. But now we're here. And what's interesting to me about it is the District of Columbia, the people who go to the polls, voted for the initiative. They have passed it, and now everybody's bitching about it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So when you go to a restaurant now, what are you supposed to do?
Well, okay. I guess the big thing that's happened, right, is the labor costs for restaurants are skyrocketing. You know, over the next few years, it's essentially going to triple because the onus is on them to be paying versus the diners through their tips.
Right.
So to make up for that, we see a lot of restaurants introducing service fees. And at the moment, those fees are all over the place, 3%, 10%, 20%. And everybody's doing it differently. Unlike a tip, service fee, they're not obligated to give it to the server. You know, they can use it however they want. So there's not a lot of transparency about how they're using the money. Everyone's doing it differently.
Right.
And, you know, it was just kind of this wild west where nobody seems to know what to do, essentially.
But I think also there are some efforts, like there's a bill that's going to be coming in from the DC Council that is, one of the proposals is to say that service charges have to go to the staff. Because right now you don't even have to. I mean, like most places, you have to display on your menu that yes, this goes towards higher wages for your workers.
Right.
But it doesn't have to. Like
Right. You could just say it.
Yeah.
Right.
But, so there's one there.
You are supposed legally you are supposed to disclose how you're using it.
How you're using it. But it is a tricky thing, and I think that one of the things I've heard across the board is that both from restaurants and from diners is that they wish there was some more both like public education early on, both like before SJ 2 was passed, but also now, like how it's going to work. And then there was also there's more of a way to even the playing field. Like we talked, we saw that there's this whole thing with the DC Attorney General going, cracking down on murky service fees and then establishing that this needs to be the language and this is where it needs to be displayed. They're like, why didn't you do this from day one?
Right.
Because it would make it a lot more helpful to have some saying, like even the playing field and say, this is what you need to do, instead of maybe threatening restaurants with, we're going to come after you and give you $1,000, charge. Fine if you don't do it.
Right.
And I think that you talked about, there's a lot of feeling that restaurants are being kind of attacked at all angles in some ways, and so I think that those kind of things would have helped, both in terms of not making the public feel like there's this restaurants are now instituting 22% charges they don't want to pay.
Well, I think there's a misconception by the general public that people who own restaurants are rich.
Yes.
That they just
greedy.
They walk into a snazzy looking place and they think, oh, well, whoever owns this has a shit ton of money.
Yeah.
Instead of being like, oh, whoever owned this spent a shit ton of money, right? Like there's a real difference in what's going.
Or they have a shit ton of investors.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One of the things I've always said that I think is really interesting is that it's unlike when you go to a doctor, right? You go to a doctor's office, you don't know anything about their business. You don't know how it all gets, you don't know why anything costs what it costs. You don't know anything. You just go in, they tell you what to do, you do it, you leave. Sometimes you wait an hour, whatever it is. Like you don't wait an hour in a doctor's office and they're like, that's a free shot of Botox for you. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
nothing like that happens. Okay. But because of the way the public interacts with a restaurant, I think a lot of people in the public think that they understand the restaurant business model. They understand everything. They understand how a restaurant works. They don't. They don't. And the misconception is on the chef side too, the restaurateur side. I think the restaurateurs think, well, you come here, you love us. You must understand how it works. But there are these vast chasms of information that neither has. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And I think that
lack of empathy.
Right. I think most people, they may be an educated diner, maybe because they know the ingredients and they know what's coming to the plate and they understand where they are, but they don't understand the math.
Right. But I will say, in the diner's defense, also, one, things are legitimately much more expensive.
True.
And they got much more expensive very fast. And you look around and, even for myself, I understand, how the restaurant works, all the struggles. But I still get the sticker shock and I'm like, oh my God, how are they charging this much? This feels like highway robbery. But I know okay, probably actually the margins are really thin. And second, I think probably even the restaurant industry people would acknowledge service just isn't as good anymore.
Agreed.
A lot of people a lot of veterans left the industry during the pandemic. You have a much greener workforce. You still have a lot of shortages. Places are understaffed. And, it's just the experience isn't at the level it was in 2019. So you're spending more, you're getting less, and you're not feeling as welcome. There's a lot.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. I think hospitality.
It depends on the place, but I'm going to say overall,
you think it, but no, I'm going to agree with what you said. But I think even pre-pandemic, DC, well, I know for a fact, DC already had staffing shortages pre-pandemic, and we already had a hospitality issue. DC does not have a wealth of a market for people who want to get into hospitality. And I think I said this on a show recently. I think, in New York and LA and other regions, not only do they see being in the hospitality industry a career path, but if you're an actor or you're going into another field, they treat it as their career because they know that they can make nice money while they go and do other things. Whereas here in the DC market, I feel like in some restaurants, the waiter's and here's your plate of fish, and I went to Harvard. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of I'm just as good as you. Yeah. In the hospitality, that there's a lot of people missing that chip. I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah, but I think whereas that's never been the case. I mean, that was the case in 2018 when we had. I think that the difference, we were talking about this a little earlier, is that maybe the hospitality scene also is not. Maybe it peaked in 2018. That's when people were really excited about it and excited to go out. And also, there's also a difference between how workers are paid between DC and Maryland and Virginia right now. And I don't know, I don't have the hard facts in front of me, but people are saying, there's some really good servers leaving and going to Virginia because they do not have the Initiative 82. They can still, come to a place like Wren and I don't know how those people are.
Right.
Come to a fine dining restaurant in Virginia and make more than a fine dining restaurant in DC.
Right.
I think theoretically, but I will say, I've kind of been asking around because there is that rumor.
Yes.
It's almost like an urban legend, but I have yet to actually speak to the person who is I now am a server in Virginia because of Initiative 82. If you're out there,
yes, contact her.
Message me. I'm curious to talk to you.
Yes, put it in the show notes.
But
let us know.
I think there is certainly that undercurrent, and I think a lot is still unfolding. Right, Initiative 82 hasn't fully rolled out, so we'll see. But also let's not kid ourselves. DC is the epicenter of the region's dining, and I don't think that's gonna change no matter what.
I don't think it's gonna change either. I think it's a pendulum swing, right?
Yeah.
And I think we're in the middle of a pendulum swing at the moment. If we want to say between 2016, if you want to look at 24 to 2018 and say we were in this huge upswing, right? We were hitting this peak of local chefs really creating new things, gorgeous spaces, new areas from the Wharf and Navy Yard and everything, and all this excitement happening. And we're just kind of coming down from that a little bit, right? It's not that exciting things aren't happening, but we've got a lot of issues out there. Service charges being one. Is there anybody that either of you see out there who you was I think they're doing this right. This is an excellent model because we're here. Yeah. We can't fight it. We can't go backwards. Is there somebody that you see doing it? You're they got it. I see what they're doing.
So I was thinking about this because you mentioned it. And I don't know about their whole wage model, but just in terms of how they're presenting a service fee to the consumer. I think the biggest thing is tipping expectations of all of this, because people see a 20% service fee and they're wait, am I supposed to tip 20% more? Or they accidentally do and they feel terrible. But then, people just don't know. Restaurants, please say very explicitly on your menu, what is the expectation for tipping?
Right.
And okay, if you don't mind me pulling out, because I screenshotted one example that I encountered.
I think Hollis's restaurant does it best.
That one is very good. This is just a very simple note on the menu from I Egg You.
Ooh, Scott and Danny.
Which opened in Capitol Hill recently. And it says, a 20% service charge will be added to all checks. The service charge goes to hourly staff wages. Additional tips are not necessary, but appreciated and will be split between hourly service staff. That's all I want to know.
That's all I want to know too.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
not necessary, but welcome. Like, just tell me that, okay?
Right.
And I honestly think probably all these places that are doing the 3% or anything that's not 20%, just raise your prices. 20%, people get that because that's what
3% people are like, I don't know what's happening.
is
I have to say, I encountered an interesting situation the other day. I was out at let's say, like a very popular Japanese restaurant, and we had a wonderful meal. Server come over. They said, we've added, there's 20% surcharge, and that is not a tip. But then left the bill, so we were a little confused.
Wait, how much was the surcharge?
20%.
Yeah.
But he was very, very. He was just like, this is not a tip. So then the manager actually came over to collect the bill and said, well, and we were like, it was actually just a group of table industry people, so it was, everyone's like kind of curious what the explanation would be. And the manager was talking about, there's a group from Seattle who came in. They're not from Seattle, and changed the way the tipping is operating in DC. But kind of like, but long story short, so it was still a little confusing but they had on the bill that they brought back, like, a tip line between 2% and 5% extra you could leave if you wanted to for the server specifically. And in some ways, I liked.
This sounds confusing.
Confusing.
Yes.
In some ways, I liked like the little this is how much it would be if you left.
Oh well, I like the help with math.
I like the help with math, and also I'm like, okay, like leaving the server an extra, $5 is not going to like break our bank, especially when you just have like a really elaborate meal. But it was a little confusing when I think I agree with Jessica completely, where when they say it's not a tip, then you're like, well, what does this mean?
Right.
Well,
technically, very technically, no, it's not a tip. But like, what do you mean when you say it's not a tip?
Yeah. So then what's the 20% for?
Yeah.
Right. No, I agree. Yes. I think the verbiage is going to have to be streamlined. And I do think that diners, especially at the end of the night, I mean, lunch is one thing, but who knows what you're drinking at lunch. But, if you've had a couple of glasses, and you get that, your mind goes to all these different places. Like, how much am I supposed to give? I don't want to look cheap, but this was an expensive meal. 20%. I mean, I think I'm hoping that we're going to see some real changes on that.
Right.
And I do think the 3% surcharge is stupid. Like,
Yeah.
that just needs to be, it doesn't make sense. And there's not a viable explanation for it. Like, raise your prices. I'm with you.
Yeah. I mean, I guess one last thing I'll say is, I would say that most restaurants don't, if they have a 20% service fee, don't expect you to tip on top of it. And I think that they should not expect you to. Like, if you have a great experience and you want to, fine. But like, it is totally unreasonable for restaurants to be expecting more than 20% above their menu price. So, if I see 20% and it's a fine meal, I'm not going to be adding on top of that.
Gotcha.
That's my rule of thumb.
Okay, I like that. What about for you?
I agree. I mean, I think that for the most part, especially if I'm just I'm dining out, I would just go with the 20%. I mean, I think in the case that they kind of pointed out, hey, you could leave in a little extra. I mean, we were like, okay, like each leaving $2 extra for a server.
It just feels
we had a nice meal. It was really well done. It didn't end up like we're like, this is not going to break the bank like $2 a person. But would I've done it had that not been like proposed to me? No, probably not.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Interesting. Okay, let's talk about crime. So, national statistics, say that crime is actually down across the country, but that's not what's happening in DC. There has been a rash of carjackings. There's these flash mobs going into nice stores like Chanel and stealing a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, all I could say when I hear that is like, we can't have nice things. Like, clearly, you go into a CVS and it's, you got to get help to get the things you want. Restaurants have had rocks thrown into their windows and had stuff get stolen and stuff like that. And not in all the neighborhoods, but in some of the neighborhoods, there's a grittier feel out there. What are you guys hearing? What are your thoughts on it? Talk to me.
I mean, I think that it is a real issue. I don't think that it's being made up at all, or like, obviously there's, when you see a rash of closings and after restaurants are blaming crime, you could think it's maybe something that's being exaggerated. But I think, both in terms of like the restaurants are operating in neighborhoods where crime is maybe up and they're not seeing as many customers, like H Street. I know people talk a lot about H Street Northeast. There are also fantastic restaurants and bars that are operating wonderfully on H Street, and so that's I think that like, people get frustrated because that narrative gets lost. Like I know Tony at the pub is always tweeting like and I think
Like, come on in.
like come on in, like,
Yeah.
business, and then it also becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where they're like, no one's going to H Street, and then people are like, oh, no one's
well
going
then
to H Street. And that's not true. People are going to H Street.
Right.
I go to H Street. So I think, but I do think, it was interesting when I read an article about how restaurants are hiring more private security, or they're also getting the Metropolitan Police Department runs a program that's existed long before the crime spike. It's been over for a decade where you can hire officers off duty to be around your establishment. Both as a crime deterrent and also it was originally meant more for clubs when big crowds were getting out and you have 400 drunk people leaving the venue,
and there's always a fight, right?
But I think just talking to them about why they're hiring security, everything from like the diplomat to the owners of Bullpen and Jetties, is that they want their customers to feel safe. They also want their staff both to feel safe and also not have to get in the mix if there's a drunk patron or during the pandemic if there's somebody who doesn't want to wear a mask. So I do think it is a real thing, and I think it's really impacting businesses in different ways.
Well, it's I guess when we go back to percentages and surcharges, adding security is a huge cost for a restaurant.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. One of the restaurateurs I spoke with, they're spending over $92,000 this year at their taco stand. Grace is 24-hour taco stand.
Right.
But having somebody out there because there was a shooting in the middle of the day, and then they've had issues with people, I think, being approached when they're standing in line late at night and things of that sort. So,
yeah. No, I mean, I agree. I feel like crime is something that restaurant owners are bringing up, a lot. Almost every time I talk to someone. At the same time, I am always cautious about sensationalizing the crime because the fact is, it's still safe to eat and drink in DC.
Of course.
It shouldn't be a reason that you don't go out in DC or that you don't go to certain neighborhoods. I just think, obviously be aware of your surroundings and, maybe have a buddy with you if you're not in a, dark area or something. But,
But do you feel that the city took their eye off the ball a little bit? I mean, I think there's a couple of factors that we can look at. And I mean, I don't have the answers, obviously. Nobody's paying me for that kind of stuff. But my question is like, okay, so we had the pandemic. We also have all these new buildings. Like if you look at the Wharf and the Navy Yard, like in all these incredible residential areas, right? With multi-million-dollar condos and apartments and et cetera, that I don't know how many millionaires there are that can afford those buildings, right? But, or the apartments or condos. But a lot of international money has come into the city, bought those things up as investments. So so between the pandemic, people not back at their offices and not as many people living in those residences. There's not as many people on the streets.
Yeah.
And is that part of the cause? Is that part of what we're seeing as part of what's happening?
Oh, that is a more complicated question than I am prepared to answer. I think there are a lot of factors, and I do think a lot of the issues do stem from the pandemic and the trauma and economic turmoil and so many different factors that are kind of incalculable. But I mean, I it's hard to blame anyone in particular. But these have been rough years, and we're still feeling the aftershocks. And I think crime is one of the big aftershocks of the pandemic.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Totally agree with you.
And I think also you touched on an interesting point that I think, when a restaurant closes and they cite crime, or they cite crime among several factors, people tend to, they hear crime, they latch on to crime, is that it's like the hot topic in DC right now.
Right.
Whereas like most people are not closing just because they had a break-in or because, one of the employees was mugged outside. These are unfortunate things that happen. They're closing because, the cost of operating is so much higher that their landlord is maybe not giving them the deal they need on the rent. And then there's crime on top of it. Like I talked to the owner of Brine and Beer Garden.
Right, they closed. Right,
closed all his DC businesses. He used to have Russia House within like almost 2 months, and he was like, it was just kind of like the cherry on the shit Sunday. Like we had somebody come in like run into the restaurant naked, and we had somebody like break in, like open all the beer taps and spill beer all over the floor, and it was just like
what's wrong with people?
Oh my god!
And so he was just kind of at that point was just like I'm done.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I don't think but that wasn't like the only thing he was talking about. He talked about 8 other issues before that, and that was just
Right.
So I guess the question is that are you hearing any collective or anybody who has interesting ideas on how to thwart that narrative, right? And what are some of the things that you're hearing maybe from the mayor's office or that you're hearing from restaurateurs, aside from security, which obviously I think if that story gets out there, more people will feel better.
And I think that's also one thing, I think it was funny, I think that it also is a service that restaurants do say that is productive. It's something that they want. It's not a negative thing at all. Like, I think they have, they'll oftentimes have officers and kind of like polo shirts, and like it's not to make people feel uncomfortable or threatened at all.
No, I think it feels good. In fact, when I was in St. Martin over Thanksgiving, there had been, on the French side, there had been some crime, I guess. I didn't really know about it, but my sister-in-law and my brother go a little more frequently. And there were, like, walking from the place where we stay into town, which is about a 10-minute walk, there was security all around the town that I'd never noticed before. And they're not, like, wearing guns or anything like that, but they're just around. And I thought, wow, that's so smart. Just as a layer of making locals and tourists alike feel safe.
Yeah. I think when you talk about the mayor's office, I know DC police are instituting a new policy of like training next year how to like de-escalate situations that don't involve guns. Which I don't know, in terms of how that impacts the restaurant industry, but that could be positive stuff.
Well, I think when it comes to theft, right? Like people going in and, I mean, retail and restaurants, right? Like people going in and stealing things, like not all the Chanel bags. Those people should be locked away for life. That's all I have to say. Like I can't even believe what they did. Like I think they got like $250,000 worth of bags. I don't know. It's an egregious amount.
That's what I feel.
So like 3 bags? No, I'm just
no, not Birkins, girl. Not Hermes, okay? No, those people went crazy. But I mean, to me, there's got to be some way to handle the crime without, I mean, you can't, somebody steals a candle in a store or, grabs some liquor out of a restaurant. Like, what's the punishment? How does that punishment fit the crime?
Apparently also, I mean, one of the security guards I was talking with is it's not necessarily people just like coming in, like grabbing something in the bar and running out. They actually said like a lot of employers are having bag checks for employees leaving the restaurant now because it's a lot of things walking off the job.
That sucks.
It's kind of,
it sucks.
An inside job.
An inside job.
And they said they also caught like 2 guns coming in the restaurant when they do bag checks going in. So,
I don't know how, that's terrible.
But they said in those incidents it was for personal protection.
Right.
They felt like they're going to get off the job. I don't know. Anyway.
I get it. All right. So we can't answer the crime issue today, but we do believe that
my pay grade how to solve DC's crime problem.
But we do believe that the narrative needs to change in order to make people feel confident about coming into the city. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we solved one problem. Okay. All right. Let's talk about badass rude customers. People who go in with a goddamn chip on their shoulder and treating servers poorly, chefs poorly, management poorly. Like, people are jerks. What do we do about them?
Oof, that's a loaded question. Again, I do think there's some lingering trauma of the pandemic where people forgot how to act in public and interact like human beings. I wrote this big story about the exact topic we were talking about with the tension between the restaurants and the diners. And one of the craziest anecdotes in that story to me was a guy who went into Caruso's Grocery, very popular Italian-American restaurant. Didn't have a reservation.
Delicious. It's delicious.
and asked if he could get a table again without a reservation. And she, the host manager looks and says, I'm sorry, we're fully booked. And he calls her the C word.
Ooh.
Straight to the C word.
Mm.
Yeah.
But like that's uncalled for. That's not going to
is.
help you get a table, and
Yeah.
that's just rude. And I mean, come
Obligate to
on,
the
what?
Yeah, and never allowed to come back.
Right, yeah. So, I just hear lots of stories like that. I mean, I think people immediately jump to let me write a 0-star Yelp review or Google review.
God, it's like the worst thing ever.
And often for, very minor infractions, or even, there are so many people just writing terrible reviews being like, the food was great, service was great, but they had a service fee. So 0 stars. It's like, well, that's
I've
not
seen those.
a real reason.
I mean, I have never left one of those reviews ever in my entire life, so I can't relate
Yeah.
to people who feel the need to share their opinion in that capacity.
Yeah.
But I'm on this side of the mic, so I guess
But
I don't have
I have
to.
to say, if you're asking part like what should be done about them, I think like one things we've seen, and I think we've written about it, is that restaurants in some ways are fighting back. Like I've seen restaurants where somebody on social media or on Yelp will have said, "Hey, everything was amazing, but you left a 20% service. You charge 20%," and the chef will go on, or the owner of the business, and say, "Well, this is exactly why we did this. Like, you don't need to come in anymore." Give them the Keith McNally treatment. Go on Instagram, and be like, "You left
Okay, not
Yeah.
the Keith McNally treatment. Come on.
That's a little extreme. But if somebody's writes this, I've seen like businesses where somebody insulted the server on the check, called them a name like afterwards and left no tip. They put that thing on Instagram. Like, well, Don, Jay, they came into the restaurant.
Right.
They don't need to be here anymore.
Right.
Yeah, I think there
Public serving
is,
works both ways.
a feeling now that the customer isn't always right
Mhm.
because the customer isn't always right. And I think where some chefs and owners might have been hesitant to call them out in the past, now they're like, nah, like we don't want a toxic
Especially when they're coming
person.
after their staff.
In our restaurant. Yeah.
Mhm.
Owners a lot of times feel very, apparently very protective of their staff. And
Right.
when somebody is making their life miserable, they'll go after them.
Well, and since we talked about staff retention still being difficult, I think staff wants to feel
Yeah.
protected and know that
Yeah.
somebody has their back.
Yeah.
Totally.
To be fair, though, there is some. We just touched briefly on hospitality, that it's not always hospitable,
Yes.
and I don't feel that we can. I don't feel like we have time to really go down that rabbit hole today. I'm going to have to bring you guys back on to discuss it. All right, very quickly, I want to do two things. First, the possibility of the sports teams leaving the area. Where do you both stand on that? You both said interesting things to me off air. I want to start with that, and then we're going to do a quick round of like end of year roundup.
I think it's definitely, it's a very strong possibility it will happen.
Mhm.
I think in terms of, are we talking about how it's going to impact the restaurant industry specifically? I think, one thing I noticed was that even restaurateurs around Navy Yard were saying, things aren't as good when the Nats aren't good. Business is not as good when the Wiz are kind of losing.
But and also, I mean, there's still going to be concerts
Yeah,
there. It's not
exactly.
like the business
Right.
is
Exactly.
dead.
But that is true. But I do think, the games are a very consistent thing,
Yes.
whereas some of the entertainment isn't.
Yeah.
They're going to have to up the programming.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, just from talking to business owners around the arena, they're worried about it. And I think, the biggest headline from it was Clyde's,
Right.
which has had that Gallery Place location for 18 years, has
Mhm.
said they're quote unquote unlikely to stay if the team leaves. But yeah, I mean, also
they could have also. I mean, I wonder, do they have a 20-year lease?
Yeah, and some people have wondered, and I don't
I have
know
a lot
the
of
answer.
questions,
Like,
right.
were they going to leave
Well,
anyways?
they were
Like,
exciting. I mean, those were. I talked to some folks at Clyde's too that were saying, that was kind of, it's one of many factors. Like it was
Yeah.
they're like also the crime is another factor. They're spending a lot of I think money on security.
Right.
So,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's also a question of then what kind of businesses are going to go in there
Mhm.
if places that are not, if places are leaving the Clyde's and the
Yeah. I mean, they're big spaces.
right. And also, I mean, the thing we have to remember is, this is a very long-term change, right?
It's not
Like
closing tomorrow.
Yeah, it's going to take a long time to
Right.
build a new arena. And, I think there is also some optimism that in that very long period, surely the city can think of a way to revitalize
Without
this
a doubt.
area in Monumental, which owns the arena. Like, there's time to come up with a solution, So, I think there could be opportunity, actually.
I really wanted Gordon Ramsay's thoughts because he's opening that street pizza place right there. So I was wondering if he would give us our 2 cents on.
That's
American
right.
Swiss.
Oh, all right. Well, we'll find out. Okay, quickly as we wrap up the show, I'm going to throw out some questions for you for the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we don't have time for long explanations, but I just want to hear where you guys think of as we leave 2023 and go into 2024. Okay, best new restaurant. I know that's a wide thing, but like, what was your favorite place this
I
year?
really enjoyed Amparo Fondita. I was really excited to see Christian open. His food is delicious. And,
Kristen Arabon.
yeah, Christian.
And you?
I'm going to go with Love Makoto, which is more restaurants in one, as a cop-out answer, because it's actually like a bunch of restaurants.
I know, but what's your favorite one in there?
I think Beloved Barbecue,
my favorite.
which is the Japanese yakiniku where you grill it on the table. It's very luxe, but also super fun. There's so much good stuff
I have
in
taken
there.
everybody who comes to town there.
Yes.
It's, to me, it's fun, it's delicious. That slaw they toss by the table side is so good.
Sleeper hit there. I have to say David Duchesne is like the king of fun Caesar salads, and his Japanese Caesar salad at the food hall is fantastic.
Oh, good to know.
I haven't tried that yet.
He's the Central Caesar salad. Which
Yes.
is like the epitome of great DC Caesar salads. It's a great one at a conventional diner. And this one there is great.
Yes.
Mhm.
All right. So we all agree on that. Okay. What was the saddest? What was the closure that really hit your heart?
For me, it was Estadio. I mean, I used to live over there, and we would go there all the time. And I just think it was very consistent and
End of an era.
And I mean, that really ushered in the revitalization of 14th Street. And I'm sad to see it go. I guess they still have a location in, is it Charleston?
Charleston.
Okay, so
Yeah.
maybe a road trip to Charleston.
Your
it's
turn.
Like, the Glen's Garden Market, which closed not this year, but then Dawson's, which followed it and had many of the same things. It's not a restaurant, but it's a place that, unlike a lot of people who say they're sad that they had a place closed, but they haven't been for months. I used to go to Dawson/Glen's like every week, if not every other day. And I really loved, like having a local independent grocery right there.
I know.
More groceries.
DC does not support its local grocery
No,
stores.
so we should.
I agree. Okay. Well, for me, it's Buttercream Bake Shop. I know Tiff closed for her own reasons, but that was my go-to for so many things.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to see that close.
Absolutely.
Okay. What are we most excited about for 2024?
Okay, one is Pascual, which is the
Stole my
Mexican restaurant from the team behind Lutess.
Okay.
But I'll pick a second one and then my
Okay.
second one is Your Only
No,
Friend.
my second one
What? Okay, see, we have exactly the same
Right, okay.
two.
This is fun working together.
I know. Okay, so Your Only Friend, former beverage director at Columbia Room, Paul Taylor, who just makes amazing cocktails. We'll continue doing that along with delicious sandwiches. I hear there's like a stained glass of like Duke's mayo.
Cool.
And it seems fun.
He had like
Excellent.
a gin tzatziki cocktail at one event that I was just like, I could drink tzatziki anyway, and I can definitely drink it with gin inside.
Ooh,
Yeah.
yum. Okay.
And that's coming to Shaw.
All right. Very exciting for both of them. I'm excited for Aventino.
Yes.
Bethesda.
Yes.
I'm Mikey Friedman, and also the Nancy Silverton Steven Starr collab.
Yes.
Yes.
I can't help it.
I wonder if that's.
I know I'm not
I know.
supposed to love
I think
it.
that's going to be 2025.
I know, but I want
But
it.
I'm excited.
Okay.
I'm also
I'm
also excited.
hopeful.
I'm also
I'm
excited.
manifesting it for now. I would
Okay.
like it to come sooner rather than later. Okay, so let's see. Let's do one last thing. Okay. What is your biggest hope for the restaurant industry in 2024?
I mean, one, I hope we can be more empathetic to each other, right? And also, I hope that restaurants can really, start to figure out the service fee thing in a way that feels transparent to guests. And, it is really simple, actually, to
communicate.
communicate
Yes.
it. You don't know, like the one I read earlier. You can communicate it very simply and straightforward, and people will feel fine about it. So,
Okay.
everyone follow that.
And
law.
you?
it's kind of more bigger picture thing, but I hope that there's some sense of like relief, like all these things we're talking about. Like I think there's like a feeling of being piled on, whether it's real or not in some cases. But the fact that there's the costs are rising, people are getting crankier, that there's not as much appreciation. I hope that there's some things, and there's some tangible things that are happening. Talk about like the bill in front of the DC Council that would have designate that service charges go to employees, like or maybe they're talking about there's this ballpark tax in DC that some people are talking about. Maybe they could get a little relief on that, especially restaurants aren't near the ballpark. Just some ways that like I think that like they could, like, if there's a way to release the pressure a lot.
I love that. I feel the same way. I think that encapsulates what I was sort of saying at the beginning of the show. Like there's just like we're so close to a boil. Yeah. And I want to turn down the temperature.
Yeah. And even if you give one thing. Or like one helpful thing, I think that would go a long way.
I agree.
Like, you don't need to solve all the problems, but like
you could just do
one of the things.
Some of the things. Yeah, I would like to see rents come down. That's my. I know that sounds ridiculous, but like, I mean, I've had John Asadorian on the show, and he has tried to talk me out of it 6 ways from Sunday. But I'm like, no, dude, the rents are too high. They're too high, and until they come down, I mean, I think we're going to be San Francisco 2.0 if we don't make some changes very, very soon. On that very, very happy note, I want to thank you both for joining me today. Tell everybody where they can find you, please, on Insta.
Axios.
There.
Anna Speaks on Twitter and Instagram, and axiosdc.com.
Excellent. And you?
I'm Jay Sidman on Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it, and on Instagram. And you can read me at Washingtonian.com or subscribe to the magazine.
All right. Well, thank you both for joining me today. Stay right here for just a sec. I can't believe nobody dug in at all while we were talking. I know, with their hands. Hey, that can be eaten with your hands. I don't know. And so can that. All food can be eaten with your hands. So I want to thank you all for joining me today. I'm Nycci Nellis at NYCCINELLIS, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all the social media platforms. And if you're listening to the show, you can absolutely watch all the things we did on YouTube as well. I want to thank you all for joining me today. Be safe out there and have a delicious week.
Produced by Heartcast Media.